Like most countries in Africa, Ivory Coast became a victim to European colonization. Released to sail started in 1893 when Ivory Coast became a French colony. The French colonial system laid out the groundwork for division and inequality between the North and the South, and the post-colonial economic realities only served to deepen this inequality. After achieving its independence from France in 1960, the Ivory Coast became a model of political stability and economic prosperity, avoiding many of the pitfalls that plagued other African nations experiencing the difficulties of sovereignty. During the late 1990s, Ivory Coast enjoyed an economic boom thanks to the market liberalization and reform. Large numbers of economic immigrants flocked to the region to work in cash shop industries, including coffee, palm oil, rubber, and especially cocoa, which Ivory Coast generates 40% of worldwide. However, like every great start, this economic prosperity eventually met its end. As political and economic problems started to brew in Ivory Coast, civil war soon followed. The country was unofficially divided in two. The government held South, which is centered around Abidjan, the biggest city and a commercial hub, which is a strongly Christian region, and home to many of the former President Laurent Gbagbo supporters, who have traditionally held positions of wealth and power in Ivory Coast. In contrast to its political opponent Alassane Ouattara, who hailed from the rebel-held north, which is dominated by Muslim immigrants who have become key businessmen and traders. As tensions run high, armed conflicts soon erupt between Gbagbo's mainly Southern Christian supporters and followers of his main opponent Alassane, were mostly Muslims from the north, and as a result, in 2002 the first civil war breaks out, dividing communities and destroying public institutions. Although most of the fighting ended by the late 2004, the violence left behind a legacy of continuous issues that have yet to be sufficiently resolved. Fast forward 5 years later, when the 2010 December Election Commission declares Alassane Ouattara the winner of presidential election runoff, people had agreed that Ouattara had won, but Gbagbo refused to accept this, leading to failed negotiations. The situation became volatile and violent as outbursts turned into the country's second civil war, resulting in over 3,000 casualties. Forces supporting Ouattara swept through the country while the former President Gbagbo remained defiant. At the start of 2011, the United Nations Peacekeeping Force had an estimated 9,000 uniformed personnel stationed in Ivory Coast. Together, in union with Alassane Ouattara's forces, they captured Laurent Gbagbo and handed him over to the International Criminal Court in Netherlands to face charges of crime against humanity, including murder and rape, allegedly carried out after disputed 2010 presidential election. In the midst of conflict, responses from former colonial power France relate that, like the rest of the international community, France supported President Ouattara. The United States and the other Western powers likewise support the opposition leader, but are already engaged in conflict in Libya. Other African nations too have backed Ouattara, but all are wary of sending troops into Ivory Coast and are opposed to intervention by the West. In 2016, the United Nations Security Council removed the 12-year-old arms embargo on Ivory Coast and renewed the UN peacekeeping mission in the country for another year. The embargo was imposed in 2004 after the country's second civil war. There are currently 6,900 UN troops and police in the Ivory Coast. Following the presidential election of 2010, the political crisis ensued. The UNOCI remains on the ground to protect civilians and support the new Ivorian government in disarmament, demobilization, and the reintegration of ex-combatants and the reform of the security sector. Firstly, there should be immediate humanitarian aid and intervention and action to prevent the conflicts from occurring. This means international communities and organizations should be very aware of the tensions and crises taking place in the country and should take immediate action before large-scale conflicts can take place. According to Hamadoun Touré, the spokesman of the UNOCI, stated that there had been the settling of scores, summary executions, inhumane and degrading treatment, arbitrary arrests on a grand scale, mainly in Douala. Douala is a regional capital and cocoa trading hub on the road from Liberia. As a result, without intervention, almost 500 people have been killed. Secondly, although Ivory Coast has been effectively able to recuperate from the post-electoral crisis that shook the nation in 2011, significant challenges still remain. One of the key challenges among them are revitalizing the agricultural sector and addressing unemployment. Ivory Coast is the world's largest producer and exporter of cocoa and cashews. 70% of Ivorians depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. Meanwhile, 25% of the nation's under 40 youth is unemployed, creating and threatening peace and stability in the resurgent state. However, the government has taken an initiative and has set an ambitious goal of creating 1 million jobs by 2016. In addition, TechnoServe, an international organization, is working in partnership with the public and private sectors to sustainably increase the incomes of small-scale cashews and cocoa farmers. Finally, in order to resolve conflicts, awareness should be raised and people internationally need to know about the conflicts and uprisings taking place in the country. So as a collective, they can advocate and force governments to take action. For the outside world to see what's happening inside Ivory Coast, journalists need to have a freedom of passage, something that they've been denied so far. According to Ivory Coast politician Maitre Bamba, who would serve as the Minister of Communication, stated that there was a real communication problem until recently due to President Gbago's regime controlling the media networks, but now the local media has the opportunity to report local incidents and raise awareness. Therefore, through media, awareness could be raised and change can be implemented.